So this is something that I've wanted to do for a while. I want to read through Isom number one. I think Isom number one gets a bad rap. I think people don't fully understand or comprehend what Isom number one did. It set up a whole entire comic book universe. That's not an easy thing. People can write comic books. To write a comic book to launch an entire comic book universe and to have that thing do this successfully, that's not an easy nor simple task. And I do not think Eric July gets enough credit for just how good of an effort he put in to ISOM number one. I think people by default, they just want to criticize him and they want to criticize his effort in ISOM number one. And I'm not saying that you can't criticize. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But I think some of the criticism is not warranted. So let's get into ISOM number one and see what's going on. So what we have here is the mass print cover of ISOM number one. First thing people brought up is 3D models. Now, I'm almost positive that the characters on the cover were 3D models were used for this. Did not pull me out of the book. Whenever 3D models are used within the book, you kind of notice it. You notice something is different, but it doesn't pull you away from the book, and the art is still good and the story is good. So for me, that was a non-issue. I heard it and I was like, oh, that's what that was? Yeah, still not a big deal. Wasn't a big deal when I read it through the first time, and it's definitely not a big deal now that people have pointed out what it is. So we open up ISOM number one, and we see Avery Silman, who is Isom, holding his niece on his shoulder, and we see him in some kind of battle with some dudes. Let me move my light over here. Let me try to get this lighting right. Excuse me as I try to set this up. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. I've never done this before, so this is going to be a work in progress, so bear with me. So you see Mr. Silman in a battle with some dudes. You don't know exactly who these dudes are. And I think this is a setup for something else. What that something else is exactly, who knows? We shall see. But this was, for me, this was your entry, and this kind of got you set up to wonder what was going on. And I like that. I like things that generate questions. You get your opening page with a letter from Eric July and ISOM number one, Ripperverse, showing you, who all worked on the book. You open up to Flores Park, Texas, the fictional city of Isom. And I really like comic books with fictional cities. I think I like comic books with fictional cities more than comic books with actual cities that we all know. It opens up with a scene in the police commissioner's office, and the new mayor is giving a speech. The police commissioner has an issue because the mayor doesn't give the police credit for the lowering of crime. There's two other officers in the room. They bring up Alpha Core. As they're having this interaction and this conversation about Alpha Core, the police commissioner gets raving mad and sends them out of the office. As he sends them out of the office, his assistant slams the door open. He's mad because she slammed the door open. He's like, what's going on? And she's like, well, sir, you told me to let you know if this happened. She's back. Who is she? We now go to Shadow Valley, where Avery has a ranch. His sister calls him and lets him know that one of their childhood friends is in some kind of danger. The mom of this childhood friend has asked specifically for Avery to get involved. He does not want to get involved. Him and his sister Altuna, who works for Projexis, they go back and forth. Finally, he decides to get involved. He tells one of his ranch hands to prepare some gentleman stuff. He'll be by to pick it up at 6, and you see this internal dialogue where he's like, "Yo, there is a reason that I bought this place out in the middle of nowhere. I do not want to be involved with this stuff. I do not want to be in the city, and yet here and still I am going into the city." And here he goes off to the city. Now, you also see an opening scene in the next panel. Somewhere else in Flores Park, this dude is flung into a car. The police are having an interaction with someone. One of the police officers is blasted with what seems like some kind of ice ray, and then Yaira is introduced. And I love how Yaira is introduced. It feels like comic books of old. You know how old comic books introduce characters and it was like a big event, almost like a scene in a movie where a character shows up on scene and there's some dramatic music plays, and then you see the character and you're like, "Oh snap, who's this?" This is the feeling I got when Yaira showed up. But then Alpha Core shows up because they're called in for some backup. And when Alpha Core comes on the scene, Yaira and Brian Solari have some back and forth. So this is the first appearance of both Yaira and Alpha Core. I'm not going line by line. I'm kind of going over this thing briefly. You should buy the book. It's a good story. In spite of what you've heard probably from some people online, it is a good story. I'm not telling you Isom #1 is the most groundbreaking story you've ever read, but for a guy who's never written a comic book, yeah, Eric July did a bang up job. So you see Braxwell, Brian Solari, Ingrid Valdez. There's a little bit of a history between Brian Solari and Yaira, but you don't really find out about a bunch of that in this book. You find out about it in some later books. So now Avery shows up to this club that's actually ran by one of his high school friends, Darren. So he comes, his employees think that he's there to pick up some food. They tell him, "Hey, it's on the other side." He's like, "Nah, I'm here to see Darren." And they're like, "Yo, send him an email." So Darren comes out. There's a funny exchange, and he recognizes Avery. He invites him in. They're doing, having some conversations about some different things. And Avery lets him know, "Look, this is what I'm here for. I'm not here to really share pleasantries. I have a question for you about Jasmine." You can tell Darren's not really happy about this. Darren is a gangster. So he's like, "Who are you to come in here questioning me?" That's pretty much his attitude. So they sit down, they have some conversations, and he goes on to berate Avery about the fact that in high school, like, you weren't really a good athlete. You got cut from the team. You never really had a problem with that, which is weird. Your sister did way better than you academically and athletically, but yet you still seem to have no issue with that, which is weird. These are some things Darren noticed. And he's like, "Yo, you faded into the shadows. So Darren had a problem with him because he had a family. Avery had his mom, had his dad, had a sister, and he really took issue with the fact that Avery had all of these things. So he's like, "Yo, I envied you for having these things, but you made nothing of yourself. And I've started this company." And he lets him know, some of it came from legal means, some illegal, but I started something and you're a zero. He has no idea that Avery has a ranch and got out of the city. Avery hung up the whole idea of being a hero. There's a reason, and you find out about that reason in Isom #2, and it's actually pretty dope. Like I said, I'm briefly going through this. So he pretty much, there's a heated exchange. He gets some of his goons. He wants to kick Avery out. He has no idea what's about to happen. And then the next scenes, you see Avery begin to lay waste to these dudes that Darren sent after him. I mean, they don't have nothing for him. He is what's called an except. Mutants in the Rippaverse are called excepts. I'm assuming standing for exceptional. They're not your average everyday person. So now there's another guy that shows up who happens to be an accept as well. So then Avery is like, "Oh, so Darren, you're hiring accepts now." So they have a fight, they have a battle, and Isom doesn't do so well. He doesn't do so well at all. He gets his clock cleaned just a little bit. He wasn't prepared for that. So he's tossed out, happens to run into Yaira. Yaira mistakenly thinks that Avery is sent there like he's some kind of detective or something like that, sent there to apprehend her. So she's mad right out the gate because she's like, so they sent you to get me now? So they get into their little altercation. She drags him up in the air and throws him down to a taxi cab. Now, if you've been following the Ripperverse, he did this in live action for the Yaira release, which was actually pretty dope. It was pretty dope to see these things played out in live action. So you see him there laying on the vehicle all crashed out. You see Alpha Core on the sidelines. They're like, what the heck? What the heck happened here? Again, I'm not reading through all of the dialogue because I actually want you to go out and pick up the book. It switches back to the ranch. The gentleman who was there to pick up his things has arrived. And onto the next page, you see Avery was in the hospital when the nurse and the doctor come to see him. He has checked himself out. Avery has decided, I'm good. My assumption is he doesn't want them to know that he is an accept. So he's like, I'm going to go on my merry way. You see him strolling through this alley, having some internal monologue. And again, I'm not reading all of these things. I'm pretty much paraphrasing through the whole book. But this is what I want you to notice. At any moment, have you noticed that the art is bad? Now, I'm not an artist. I did draw growing up. Try to get some of the glare off of there. I did draw growing up, but at no point looking at this did I ever think when I was reading through this book initially, yo, this art is bad. I actually, to the contrary, I thought this art is very, very solid. I give this art, if I had to judge on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll take a little bit of points off for the 3D models that were used, but not really, because I really don't care. Just being honest with you. I would give this book a solid 8.5 as far as art is concerned. This is really good art. Just consistent all the way through the book. So he meets up with his sister, lets her know a little bit, what's going on. She's trying to tell him, be safe, don't get hurt. Now Avery's involved. Now he's like, yo, I now have to figure out what's going on. There's some things that go on at his ranch. I'm not going to get into that because this kind of leads into Isom number 2. So many nuggets were dropped in his book. And this is one of the problems people had with Isom number 1 is that everything wasn't told to you all at once. That wasn't a problem for me. I don't need a story to be fully fleshed out for me all in one book. I have no problem with waiting till later on, and that's what we got here with Isom. Later on, we figure out some more things. We find out more things that's going on. So anyway, the ranch hand, some of that right there, what's happening leads into Isom number 2. So I'll leave that there. You see him texting back and forth with his sister, and he's now decided, okay, I got to figure out what's going on. Several things happen. Of course, his ego was hit. This dude just cleaned his clock. He can't have that. And plus, now he's thinking about, and the reason I can say this with some bit of authority is after reading Isom number 2 and finding out why he got out of the hero business, you can see why Jasmine being in danger would kind of force his hand, and he would say, okay, now I have to figure out what's wrong with her. He would not be able to live with himself if he allowed this thing to pass and he didn't do anything about it. So anyway, he was asking a man on the street about this club, And there was that interaction. I'll leave that to you. You get introduced to some more characters, some shady characters that are sitting in the club that are clearly, as you can tell from the glowing eyes, not normal people. But what are they exactly? Inquiring minds want to know. Again, this is something I will leave you to discover on your own. I would highly admonish you buy the book and discover that. Avery shows up. He is in a hoodie, trying to stay low key, trying to figure out what's going on. Now he's in his detective mode, but now he's ticked off. And you're going to see what happens when he's ticked off. And you see he's having some, I love the internal dialogue that Avery has with himself. I love when characters do that. So he shows up, he finds Jasmine, he talks with her, and he's sending her now on her way. And now there's some goons that want to know what's going on. They got some questions. They're trying to hem him up. Of course, you know how that's going to go down, and you see it. Avery gives them the absolute what for. They had no idea what they were in for. This is not a normal dude. So Avery's going into the club now because he's ticked. Now, now you see this dude right here. He's trying to stop him. Now, if I had just watched what Avery did to those other two dudes, I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't want no problems with this dude. This is not the problems I want. And the dude says, this is the idiot from earlier. So if you watched what he did earlier and you still want to get up in his face, man, you got a death wish. You're a different kind of dude. Avery kicks the door down to the club, interrupting everything, because now he doesn't want to do any more talking. He is here about that action. He's like, all right, it's time to get down. I'm here for the action. I'm here for the rematch. That's what's going on. And he commences to put a beat down on all of Darren's goons. I love the action in these scenes. It plays well. And like I said, the art is good. This is not bad art. It's not bad art at all. Anybody who tells you that, in my humble opinion, and like, look, it's subjective. Maybe there are some people who believe that the art is bad, but in my humble opinion, it is not. I'll just say that. So now you see he's about to have his rematch. And he's getting prepared. He's stretching. I don't know if you can see it. I'll move it here. You can see where he's stretching. He's like, all right, it's rematch time. We about to get it in. We about to see what's going to happen. This time, he's now fighting smart. And you could see he's evading. He's using his opponent's weight against him. He's thinking through this fight and not just brawling. And I like this scene right here. Now, I don't know if this is one of those 3D assets. I don't think it is. But even if it is, as I told you before, it does not pull you out of the art. The art is good. The art is very good and enjoyable. It's overall an enjoyable book. I was going to read through the whole thing, but like I said, I want people to actually go out and buy this book and read it. I believe it is worth your money. So now you see there's some rough housing going on. It looks like Isom is not really doing, or Avery is not really doing so well, but he gathers himself. And as he gathers himself, you begin to realize, okay, something's going on with him. What is his powers exactly? How does this work? And then he commences to put the beat down on this dude. And I like what he tells him. He says, if you get up, you're the one that'll end up dead from this. So he's telling this dude, stay down. Don't get up. You don't want these problems. And now the police show up because there's a commotion at this club. So clearly, I don't know if Darren called the police, him being a gangster, probably wasn't him, but somebody called the police. The police show up, and now Avery is like, oh my goodness, here we go. But of course, he evades with no problem, gets away from the situation and heads to his sister's house. And there his niece wakes up, and him and his sister are having a conversation. I'll read a little bit of what they're saying. She opens the door and she says, "Avery, it's near 2 in the morning. You couldn't have texted me?" And he says, "Yet you answered the door unarmed. Got you that gun for a reason." He's like, you're telling me this and you answer the door not armed? What are you, nuts? It's 2 in the morning. That's exactly what a brother would say to his sister. And they have a conversation back and forth about the things going on. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to read. If I read every panel, this would last, oh man, this would last probably 2 or 3 hours. Maybe at some point I might do that. Maybe read it in sections. I'll think about doing that. Tell me what you think. I might read Isom number 1 in sections, like take, 20 pages, do one episode where I read those 20 pages and then another episode where I read the next 20 pages. Let me know what you think, if you think that's something that I should do. Anyway, they have their discussion and their interaction. And he gets to see some video, some things that went on at Projexis. And I'll read this dialogue right here. It says, "The hesitation says a lot. It's about time. Something may have happened too early. Something she thought she could hold off." So they're talking about Jasmine. They're watching this video and having an interaction, and they're trying to figure out what exactly is going on. Why didn't she respond to Altoona? Why did she go absent? Maybe Darren has something on her. And more than likely, that's what it is. He has something over her head. So now you see Darren in his office. He is fuming after what happened. And he has some interactions with some people. There's some gangster stuff going on. Again, not going to get into all that. Avery now goes back to the person who originally designed his uniform. So there are some people who clearly know who Avery is. And he goes to get his uniform. So clearly, when he retired, he gave his uniform up and everything. And there's some dialogue back and forth. The gentleman tells him about some different things and some different upgrades. And he's wondering if the outfit still fits. And yes, it does. You see Isom in all of his glory. You also get introduced to this band who's actually more than just a band, Norfolka, at the end of Isom number 1. And how do I know Norfolka has powers? Well, you kind of see a little bit of that at the end of the book. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people introduced. Again, at any moment, looking at any of this art, did you think to yourself, trash? I didn't. Nothing about this art, in my humble opinion, said trash. That's where you see Norfolka introduced. Let me flip through some more pages. Again, like I said, this is not a detailed walkthrough, but kind of a brief walkthrough. You get to see the pages. You get to get a little bit of what's going on, hear a little bit about the story. And you see here they got the Rippaverse Code of Ethics. And I like that. I like the fact that the Rippaverse has a code of ethics. I think that's a good thing. You see Yaira in her full costume. And yeah, that was Isom number 1. Now, I don't know about you. I'm not going to tell you I am the perfect judge of comic books. But when I read that, and I remember this was about, let me fix my camera here. This was about maybe, oh man, was it 2 years ago? I think it was 2 years ago when Isom came out. It's kind of light right now, so I'm looking a little different, so forgive all of that. Anyway, This book is good, man. This book got me super excited when I first read it. And even now, look, I've read through it a few times. Even now, looking through the book again makes me want to read it again. If I can get a comic book and that comic book has me at the point where I want to read the book again, where I want to return to read this thing that I've already read, to me, that comic book has done its job. It has told me a good story, good enough that I want to read again, and good enough that I'm interested to know more. This is why I was perfectly fine with Eric July not giving me all the details right out the bat. I want to come back. I want to know more. And that's the whole point.